Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. So we're now entering the industry case section, case study section, where we're going to see how organisations are actually applying QRA in complex and real world environments. And so first up is Raphael Hartke. Raphael's a specialist in quantitative risk and predictive analytics with vast experience in working in more than 25 countries globally, and someone I've personally known for over 15 years now. I think it is Raphael. It's a long time again. Raphael is also active, especially in the oil and gas and mining sectors over in Brazil, where he lives. And over the years, he's helped companies translate their risk into strategic insights. And importantly, he's equally at home teaching, consulting, and mentoring rising risk professionals in the industry. So I'm going to introduce this session. Raphael's going to be showing how leading oil and gas firms use ModelRisk to optimize decisions, manage uncertainty, and communicate risk effectively. So I'm going to hand the session over to you, Raphael.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. I believe you can see my screen already, so I'll get started so that we have more time for questions at the end, right? So the focus here will be how I see companies applying ModelRisk in the oil and gas sector, okay? Of course, it's a large area, a large industry, so there are many different ways people do this. I'll focus on some of them, okay? I'll jump the intro. I think Craig already mentioned the most important things. I've been working with quantitative risk analysis for the best part of 2 decades, and I have seen a lot of stuff on different companies, different projects, greenfield, brownfield. Lately, I've been working a lot with the commissioning, so it's interesting that feels like we're getting old, right? So the projects I worked on 20 years ago, now they are talking about decommissioning. So the commissioning is something I didn't see 20 years ago, and now I see it. So we're getting old. The projects are getting old. We are getting old. So here's a list of some things that are often used in the space of probabilistic analysis within the oil and gas industry. Of course, schedule of projects and investment, CAPEX of projects, that's a big thing, especially for large mega projects, greenfield mega projects, exploratory frontiers. Also critical resources allocation. So when people are planning, some resources are extremely critical, such as some pieces of equipment, onshore, offshore, drilling rigs, even for refineries, some pieces of equipment are critical. So planning with them in mind, with the uncertainty of the schedule in mind, is very important. Production curve uncertainty analysis. This is a typical thing. We're going to see an example of this real quick here on the presentation. Commodity price volatility, that's also something that's part of any kind of valuation, cash flow analysis, NPV, any kind of divestment, investment, we should take into account the price volatility. We're also going to see that briefly within a model later. Cash flow analysis and valuation is a thing that most oil companies work with the probabilistic point of view. One simple production curve and one simple price prediction is not enough to make good decisions in oil and gas. So the probabilistic analysis helps a lot here. And also one thing I've been working more lately is the commissioning. So preparing the funding for the end of life of the project. How can we make sure that we do have the proper funding when the project ends, when the cash flows are really low, when the revenues are borderline 0 with the costs? How can we make sure that we provided the proper funding along the lifetime of the project for the decommissioning phase? This is a very important step in terms of environmental risks. Government agencies are looking into this in different countries, insurance companies, and of course, the oil and gas companies themselves, right? We could also mention that companies use probabilistic analysis for portfolio management, for value of information. So all the exploratory campaign and all the initial steps of the initial analysis of a new play pass through the value of information analysis, where probabilistic is key also. So those are the things I see most companies working with in terms of probabilistic analysis, and I have experience in all of them. I'll try to bring some of that into the conversation here, okay? Before we get started, why risk analysis, right? Why are we talking about risk analysis in oil and gas? Even though it should be kind of obvious, it's always good to mention a few things. First of all, we are going to quantify and manage uncertainties in production, CAPEX, cash flows, valuations. So quantifying and managing uncertainties, managing expectations that are created based on single point estimate or single curves, managing those expectations, bringing uncertainty into the conversation. That's really important. We'll be able to identify and manage key risk drivers. You can only manage, mitigate what you identify first, right? So it's important to identify them. The sooner, the better. We can make better investment decisions, especially when we're talking about volatile market conditions such as prices or interest rates or exchange rates. In our case, in the oil and gas industry, the price volatility is king. It changes the production profiles of the whole globe. We can make more robust planning and better allocate our contingencies. So when we're talking, for example, about critical resources, this is extremely important. But also contingency allocation for CAPEX, for schedules, and managing the expectations. First of all, generating realistic expectations with stakeholders, and then managing these expectations. It's very common for the initial deterministic scenario to review itself as very optimistic later down the road. When you start actually, executing the schedule, executing the investment, you see that the deterministic point of view from the beginning is very optimistic. Even when companies say, oh, but we're using a very low commodity, very low petroleum price curve to make sure that we're not losing money, then you're leaving money at the table at the same time. You're missing opportunities, perhaps. You're not seeing the big picture. So bringing probabilistic analysis into the game makes you see opportunities and risks as they are. And of course, you can at the end test different scenarios, different strategies, mitigation strategies. This is where, for example, value of information comes in. Looking at the different scenarios that play, that reserve, that production profile might bring in, and how to deal with that. And then why model risk? Well, first of all, it's a very good software with a very large comprehensive library of distributions. It has very good time series models that we can use to represent the volatility of oil prices, natural gas prices, interest rates, commodity exchange rates, and all those macro variables. Time series models are easy to use in ModelRisk. It's all in Excel, quick learning curve. It has a very robust math behind it, years of experience. Timur was here. He's a very experienced guy. The development team is very experienced, very good, and the math behind it is extremely polished. So it's something you can, trust. It also has some really great reporting features to help you. Usually, whoever is creating the model, analyzing the risk, is not the same person making the decision, right? So we need ways to report what we see, what we found, so that the decision makers can make their job, right? Usually it's not up to us to make the decision. We're helping the decision makers take the right level of risk, understand if what they believe in is part of the project or not. So having good reporting features to help the decision process is really important. And ModelRisk excels at this. It's best tool I know for reporting purposes and creating reports, updating them, answering questions real quick. It's a proven technology used by companies of all countries, of all sizes and sectors. So that's it. Now let's jump to the problems at hand, right? So first of all, production curve uncertainty analysis. Real quick, what we usually pretend the production curve is, right? So this is the production curve of a given project over, let's say, 100. Let's imagine an onshore well producing for like 100 months, right? That will be like almost 10 years. You start with a ramp up phase, and then you have, after this initial drilling phase where you have no production, then you have a ramp up phase for a few months. You're increasing production, and then you have a plateau phase where you have possibly multiple wells producing, possibly a few injector wells producing. Usually this is constrained by your production capacity, and then inevitably things get old, right? The reserve gets depleted, and you have a depletion phase, a phase where your production gets lower and lower every month, the decline phase, okay? This is what we pretend the production curve is, but this is what it actually looks like if you look at data, right? You have a weird ramp up phase with some bumps along the way. And then when you think you started, you know, the plateau phase, oops, something comes up and no, you're not there. You have a shutdown because of whatever technical reason, and then you go back, and then you offshoot the production way above what you thought you should be, you know, producing, and then you have another shutdown, and then it goes. Eventually, you're definitely on the decline phase, but where does it really begin? We don't really know. Or it could be like this, or for another well, it could be like this. This is the uncertainty, the probabilistic part, you know, messing around with our expectations. So how can we measure this, for example, based on data, so that we make a better, you know, a representation of what will happen in our next project, so that we make a better valuation of our next project, for example. That's where the probabilistic analysis comes in. So we transform this initial, you know, deterministic view of things, or you know, the production is very smooth and everything is known, into a more probabilistic way of seeing it, ranges around the values. And by the way, this figure here, this is an actual result of ModelRisk. This is not, these ranges here, I didn't make them at all with PowerPoint. Those are actual results from the model, the uncertainty around what the production could be, okay? And of course, what you will observe is this, is a different profile, more or less around your P50, your average, something like that. This is what you will end up seeing in real life, but most of the time within the ranges that we estimated using probabilistic analysis, okay? So I'll jump into the model here real quick. What are the key risk drivers that we usually observe when we're talking about production curve? First, the duration of the drilling phase. Sometimes this is critical, especially if you're talking about offshore projects, if you're talking about long-term planning. The duration of the drilling phase might be important because it drives the initial moment of the first oil and the initial moment of a ramp-up phase. So the duration of the ramp-up phase is also relevant. If we're talking about an onshore field, let's say you're drilling 100 wells within an area onshore. Very likely, when you finish the last well, the first one will be already, you know, at a very sharp decline. So it takes a long time to drill the wells, and 100 wells might take 1, 2, 3 years to drill. So the ramp-up phase might be very, very long, and actually kind of mixed with the plateau phase. And the production phase, the plateau phase is what we usually are interested in. This, you know, this plateau, this production phase that we have here on top of the curve. This is what we're usually interested in. But there's also uncertainty around it. How efficient will our production be? Will we actually hit our targets? How long will this production phase be? When will the decline actually kick in? It actually depends on a number of factors, but it's one very big important risk that we face. Also, the level of this production phase, it might be a little bit higher or lower than what we are estimating. There might be even some decline, very small, but there might be some decline during this production phase, especially if you have multiple wells. The last one starts when the first one is already old, right? So it's already declining. And another very important risk factor, the decline phase, the decline rate of the decline phase, where, you know, the production actually starts going down sharply. And then usually there's not much we can do in terms of injection or new wells. Well, we can drill new wells and have a new project, but the wells that we had, eventually the decline will kick in and there's not much we can do. There's also some noise. This has a lot to do with the operation, the operational side, equipment failure, loss, pressure that you lose within the well, things like that, that end up becoming kind of noise around your model, and also production shutdown events. You have in real curves, you have many shutdown events, especially if you're looking at daily data, right, or hourly production data. You have shutdowns that, for whatever reason, have to stop production of that particular well, do something, and then come back. You might have pressure bottlenecks and things like that. So this is another important event of risk that we can model. And on a very simple model here in ModelRisk, we can have all of these risks modeled with a probability distribution for them, and then we can, you know, create our production profiles looking not only at this expected, or I wouldn't say unrealistic, but let's say this textbook point of view of things, right? Where you have a ramp up, you have a plateau, you have a decline phase. Let's forget about this optimistic or unrealistic point of view, and let's model something a little bit more realistic, what might actually happen. And then during the simulation, you will be simulating the many different possibilities, right? You have, for example, one simulation here, one scenario where we had 2 shutdowns during the ramp-up phase and no other shutdown during operation. Of course, the number of shutdowns that we will see depends on the likelihood that we assign for them in the model, which in turn depends on the data you have. We can estimate all of these parameters from real data. Probability of shutdown, decline phase rate, duration of your plateau phase, all of those can be estimated from data from similar wells. So one scenario here where I had like 5 or 6 shutdowns during the lifetime of the project. And of course, here I'm looking at a very short production time frame, right? So that it can fit, the screen. But then what you get at the end after you run your simulation, I'll run the simulation real quick here. No, I don't want to save the results. Let me just say no to this. So when you run your simulation real quick here, run just a few scenarios for us to see. So what you get at the end is the probabilistic curve around what you are expecting, right? So you are expecting something, but you get something slightly different, and there's a range of possible values around it. The bad news is that usually there are not many risks that bring opportunities here. We're usually talking about shutdowns, lack of efficiency, lack of pressure, so things that usually hurt your production. But those can all be measured and simulated, okay? So that's one very typical use of model risk within the oil and gas industry. Probabilistic analysis helps you have better estimates of what your production might be. If you're talking about a portfolio, that becomes even more important. Now, another place where we use probabilistic analysis a lot is NPV analysis, cash flow analysis, evaluation of projects, understanding what the return of that investment might be in the future, right? This is very important for oil and gas companies. The investments are huge. The maturity takes a long time for it to have your revenues. You'll be married to that project for 20, 25 years sometimes, okay? The typical risks that we see professionals modeling, actually typical risks that affect a project within the industry are obviously production, price volatility, investment costs, operational costs also. And specifically for each individual case, you might have environmental risks, you might have regulatory risks, schedule risks. For example, here in Brazil, we have a huge exploratory frontier, which is within the Amazon forest. There's a lot of schedule risks. The logistics for you to transport material into the forest in the middle of nowhere. It's even considered offshore for practical reasons, even though it's not, in the sea. The schedule challenges are huge because you have problems to transport material during parts of the year. You have problems to actually work outside because of the rain and the environmental conditions during another part of the year. So the schedule is a big thing when you're dealing with this. Also, when you're dealing with offshore projects like the sea, some months of the year have better sea conditions or worse sea conditions that affect your drilling operations, right? The waves and the wind can actually make you stop your drilling operation, have to disconnect everything, go away, come back tomorrow. Supply chain also poses a threat sometimes, especially now with this macroeconomic problems that we see globally. Will that affect our supply chains or not? I've even seen companies worried about like piracy in the in the Asian seas because whatever they were bringing from Singapore had to pass on areas like East Africa where we have sometimes piracy, and that could be a problem. So supply can also be one of the risks you include here. And of course, if you're working in your home country or if your project is abroad, add to that political risk, and so it goes. The list can be infinite, but we can customize that to your project, of course. The main result we were looking at when we were talking about cash flow and NPV analysis, valuation of projects, most of the time, what is the NPV distribution? What are the main risk drivers of your NPV, of your profitability? And very important, what's the likelihood of having a positive NPV or even a positive an NPV higher than X, whatever number you have as a target, right? In the deterministic sense, most of the time this is pretty, this works, this is all fine. In the probabilistic sense, you start seeing that things are not so pretty as they paint, right? So production curve, same thing as before. You may have a production curve with uncertainty. Here I have 4 simulated paths for the production curve of this specific project, where the production starts in 2025, goes for a few years, and then goes down in 2044. I have to shut down production, decommission the project, and it's the end of the lifetime of the project. Even though there's probably some oil left, I will have to decommission my project. So the oil project production, when you look at that from the probabilistic point of view, you see that the oil production behaves more or less like this. I have a plateau phase. My operational capacity is about, I don't know, 9,500 cubic meters per day. That's like 60,000 barrels or something per day. So it's a huge offshore, very large offshore project where I have a plateau phase here, limited production, limited by the capacity of my production vessel. But then of course you have uncertainties that may throw that production down a little bit. So here the probabilistic analysis starts to deviate from the deterministic one. We also have volatility in oil prices. So getting prices up to 2024 here, I can run a simulation and figure out what prices might be in the future based on our expectations of what the long-term price will be, and also based on the historical data, accounting for measuring volatility based on historical data, okay? So in this specific project, we assume that prices will be in the long term, probably around $80. That would be a decent equilibrium price for the industry. Prices can be a lot lower, as we see in this simulated scenario. Prices can go down, eventually a crash may occur. It happened in the past, right? So a crash may occur, but then it comes back, it comes back up. Prices may, spike, go up, but not for long, just like before, right? So the simulated profile here, I have one simulated profile. We'll have, of course, 1,000 or 10,000 of them during the simulation, and we use that to bring this volatility risk into the model. Okay. Also, the variability of the other risks or other variables that we have, such as facilities, fixed operational costs, decommissioning, variable costs, etc., each with their own uncertainty around it. Okay. And then at the end, what you get is your simulation results. So I'll actually open this model over here so we can see it running. Let me just get that real quick here. Okay, so here we have the model up and running. I have the inputs. I have a historical prices where I'm calibrating, using historical prices here to calibrate a time series model for this project. I'll jump right into the report where the things I want are stored, and I'll actually run the simulation here real quick. For example, just 1,000 scenarios to make it quick. And what we will get, this is a very interesting feature of the software to me. What we get after the simulation, by the way, it's running here. Just a few scenarios for it to get there. One very interesting feature that we have in ModelRisk is that whenever you are analyzing your results, for example, here is the NPV of the project. I'm checking the likelihood that the NPV will be negative. So this is a very profitable, very good project. I have another histogram here with the total production of the project. And I have another histogram for the decommissioning cost. Then the tornadoes, of course. The price of oil is the most important variable here for the NPV, especially price of oil over the first few years. Then of that time period between 2030-40, maturity of the project, and then oil prices at the end of the life of the project, operational costs, production, etc., the tornadoes. I can also look at scatter plots to see how variables combine with each other. So I can create, of course, all kinds of charts here to understand the risk profile of your outputs, right? But one very cool thing that we have here is that all of these charts can be thrown in Excel as a what we call a linked chart. And once you do that, you don't really need this interface anymore. If you throw your charts in Excel, like I just did here on this report page, I have all my charts here, the charts that I would like to see, that I would like to analyze. Okay, even going down here, I have some charts here with the commission costs, etc. Oh, there's one here that I messed up, right? So if you go back to your charts and you correct that, I don't want all of these graphs on the same chart. I would leave just one. If you do that and you either run your model again or you update your linked charts like this with the click of a button, your report is already updated automatically. If you run your simulation again, these reports here will be, all these charts will be automatically updated. And they behave like, regular Excel graphs, regular, not really Excel graphs, but like pictures. It's very easy to change their sizes if you want or anything like that. And you can easily set up a customized report and have all the information in the same place with the same structure so that people get used to looking at what you're doing. People get used to understanding what you are doing with your risk analysis. And that is really powerful. Also, when people have questions, you change something in the model, run again, and you get the same report in the same place real quick. Okay, this is a very nice feature of ModelRisk in my humble opinion. Now, I mentioned that one last use that we have, which is the commissioning, like studying the funding for the commissioning phase, which is an extension of the model we just had here. So how do we deal with that, and why are we worried about that nowadays? So the commissioning costs can be very high. They represent the costs that you have to like raise the wells, plug all the wells, close everything. This is a huge environmental risk, leaving something undone or leaving an infrastructure rotting in the wild. This is a huge environmental risk, something that all countries are worried about, and they will force companies to take care of that. But the problem is that the commissioning here happens in green on your cash flow at the end of the life of the project, where revenues are really low. So on the exploration phase, you probably have no revenues. You are paying for the exploration phase, for the exploratory phase. You're paying for that with some other cash, with investment. Then you have the development phase of the project, where there's a huge investment and where your revenues begin. Then after a few years, your revenues go down and you have to abandon the project. But you can't just walk away. There's a very large piece of investment that you have to make on the commissioning phase. The problem is that you won't have money for that if you don't prepare beforehand. Companies with a large portfolio assume usually that one project in their production phase will pay for the decommissioning of another project that, by the way, paid by the exploratory phase of the first one in a portfolio that rose nicely. But not every company has a portfolio. And even if you have a portfolio, government agencies still want you to prove that you will do that you have the cash to do that, especially if you work for an international company and your project is abroad. The other government, maybe they won't take your word for granted. And they're right, by the way, right? They have to protect their assets, their environment, their society. So the idea here of the commissioning risk is that we're going to evaluate the probability that you won't raise sufficient cash flow to pay for the commissioning costs at the end of the project. And this is all based on a quantitative analysis, of course. We can estimate how likely is it that you will have enough cash if you start your funding, for example, in 2030 or 2035 for this project. If you start your funding in 2030, the likelihood that you will not have enough cash flow to pay for the decommissioning is very low, like 1%. If you start your decommissioning efforts funding in 2035, it's not very likely, but there's already a 33% chance that you will not have enough cash at the end for your decommissioning, right? You can even study that using some of the charts that we have here in the model, some of the charts that we have in ModelRisk. You can study that in terms of scatter plots and show that, you know, if you start your decommission in 2030, even though the likelihood is very small, even if prices are kind of low, you still have a lot of the probability of meeting your commitments is very high. Now, if you start your funding by 2035, the other chart we have here, and this is all based on the simulation results, by the way, we can see, I think that's better on the PowerPoint actually. You can see here that if you start your funding by 2035, even though it looks like there's only 30% chance that you will not meet your targets, right? It's what we evaluated at the beginning. But now if you look at conditional probabilities, looking only at, you know, scenarios where prices are low, below $80, we see that the likelihood that you will not meet your commitment is like 50-50. Like 30% chances that you will meet your commitments with low prices, 32 that you will not. So in this subsample of the scenarios where prices are low, it's almost like 50-50 chances that you will not be able to pay for the commissioning costs. So you can start looking at the probabilistic analysis from another point of view, not only looking at a single plan or, you know, a single scenario, but looking at all of these different scenarios, conditional probabilities, and plan better, right? So if we see prices going up, maybe we can postpone. We have good reason to postpone the decommissioning fund, the creation of the decommissioning fund. If we see prices going down, if we have a lower expectation of prices, we should start earlier, even though that's bad news. That will help you offset this risk in the future. So all of this can be studied, and companies are doing this. They are studying not only oil companies, but insurance companies, government agencies. They are all looking into this so that they can manage better their future and lower risks in the future. So I think I did it on time, right, Craig? I think we have time for questions, at least some of them.
We do indeed. We do indeed. So yeah, this session is going to finish at 4:45. So we have 10 minutes for some questions.
Oh, let me just check them if people asked questions here. I haven't looked at the questions yet, so give me just a second here, okay?
I have one, Rafa, can you hear me? This is Gustavo.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the question, maybe the question some people are asking is, how long would it take to build a model like this? Because you see that it's very complete and it takes the whole life cycle of it, and it's a two questions in one. How long would it take? And do you think that the data that you will get from the company would be easy to get? So I will let you answer.
Okay, so the model depends a lot on the conditions of the country, because different countries, they have different tax profiles and different tax requirements. So the cash flow needs to be customized, the deterministic one even, right? Needs to be customized to the project itself, to the condition, to the country, to the kind of contract. It can be production sharing, it can be just royalties. So there are all kinds of different contracts, even in a single country. Here in Brazil, have different contracts with different maturities. So that's one thing. Now, the deterministic model itself takes a long time to build, and it's a very sensitive thing. I would say that building a model like this would take probably 2 or 3 months of work. With the deterministic model set up, validated, you know, engineering, procurement, tax, everyone agreeing that the model is okay, then the probabilistic side is not that complicated with ModelRisk. What we have to do is, first of all, understand, make a risk assessment. What are the main risk drivers that we believe might be the main risk drivers within this project? The usual candidates: costs, investment, volatility of prices, and volatility of production. They're always there, but we should always, you know, take one extra step and take a look at other things such as regulatory, political. Sometimes you have communities involved. Sometimes you have delicate environments that we're working with. Here in Central America, South America, we're now talking about a new exploratory frontier, which is on the Guianas, on that area near the Caribbean, which is a huge environmental risk. We have to be very careful when working there, right? So companies need to be prepared for that. So a risk assessment, qualitative, comes in at this point. Probably 1, 2, 3 months of work also to get all of that together. A lot of different people need to participate. We need the expertise of everyone involved, right? Then again, as Alex was talking about in the previous session, the AI will not do that for you. They will provide general prescriptions to very specific problems. So we need the experts working on that. And that kind of intelligence, that kind of knowledge is probably not even recorded properly on the internet, by the way, right? So after this qualitative risk assessment, then we do build the quantitative model. Actually, we can build the model beforehand, but then we populate the quantitative model here in ModelRisk. Building the quantitative model and running it, I would say it's the easiest part, right? If you have a proper calculation engine, a nice deterministic model that takes into account the intricacies of taxing, of production limits, etc. And after the risk assessment phase, which is extremely important, I mean, the tool is very user-friendly and helps you do all of that. You can have things on a risk register. You can have variability wherever you want in the model. You have time series model right out of the box. Oh, but I would like to use a very specific time series model for my thing. You can build them in ModelRisk. You're in Excel, so you have a lot of freedom to build your own models if you want. And the variability of your model will be dealt by ModelRisk, right? So I would say that the ModelRisk part, the quantitative part, is the easiest one. And even for very large models nowadays, you can run them really fast. CPU power is not a problem anymore. I would probably give you 1 month to get the quant part up and running. Then the decision analysis comes in, right? It doesn't end there. You have to present your results, discuss that with management, and ideally, if you're doing this early enough, change your project. You'll see that some risks that you thought were relevant, they are not. Depends on what you look at. Maybe something that's relevant for the schedule is not relevant for the NPV, right? Maybe something that's relevant for the NPV is not relevant for the schedule, but you do face serious repercussions when you don't meet your schedule deadlines for whatever reason with government or with a partner that is a partner company in this joint venture. So you have to analyze the simulation results from all of these points of view and probably mitigate some of the risks. And then, of course, run the model again. The cool thing is that you have a toolbox. Now you have a simulation of what the project is that you can tweak around to have the best possible version of that project, robust against all risks that do exist, that may come up or not, right? And we have all the tools here that we can use to put that together. The qualitative risk assessment is very important. It involves a lot of people. It involves a lot of competing points of view, right? And sometimes people that have different languages, not languages as in Portuguese, English, Spanish, but languages as in math, law, statistics, management, environmental. So they speak or they see the risks in a different way. And you as a risk analyst or as a risk manager, you need to put all of that together under the same hood, right? You have to somehow transform that into numbers for your model. So that's an interesting, very hard but interesting challenge. I think the qualitative risk assessment gives you a lot of requires a lot of hard work. The quantitative side, maybe it's because I've been doing this for so long, so I know how to do it. For me, it's the easiest part. The tools are there. I'm able to transform any kind of risk that you throw at me in a probability distribution that properly maps that reasonably and include that in the model. So I don't see that as a problem. Many years ago it was. Nowadays it's kind of straightforward. So I would say maybe 6-7 months to get from zero, right, to have a model up and running, depending, of course, on the complexity of the country, of the contracts we're dealing with.
Thank you, Rafa. And I don't know if you can see your Q&A, your chat. You have a few questions there, or I can read it to you if you like.
Maybe just take one more, Gustavo. Yeah.
So it says it says, what is your quantitative risk management approach for the actual operation of a petrochemical plant excluding purchase and sales prices?
So one thing I see in all kinds of operational problems, right, which is more or less this. This is a production curve of an oil well or a portfolio of wells. But on a mining plant, you have more or less the same situation. You have some kind of nominal capacity, mining, petrochemical, whatever it is, any kind of industrial plant. You have a nominal capacity, and of course, you cannot go beyond the operational capacity, the stated capacity. And of course, you're never exactly there because you have maintenance, planned maintenance. So your efficiency is usually 98, 99%, right, on a good plant. But you have unplanned maintenance where sometimes your production goes to zero for a few hours or even for a few days. So understanding that and being able to map that into parameters allows you to create better estimates of your production efficiency, etc. A lot of people work with averages, right, which is the first step. Yet averages, even though in the long run they might tell you more or less what your yearly revenue or cash flow will be, you still have many problems that the average does not show you. Problems that you could be interested in fixing. So for example, in this case here, these extreme shutdowns that of course I exaggerated on this graph, right, so that we can see it. But these extreme shutdowns that we have 4 times, 5 times on this picture, shouldn't we, or can we perhaps make some kind of investment with operational cost or with investment to reduce the likelihood or the duration of these shutdowns? Does it pay off? The average will not tell you anything about this. The data analysis and a probabilistic model will allow you to check whether perhaps reducing by 10, 20, 50% the occurrence or the duration of these shutdowns, how much money am I leaving at the table by, living with this problem? Can we fix it? Can we spend $1 million or $10 million and fix it completely, or reduce it somehow? Does it pay off? The probabilistic analysis will help you understand those. Or what is the reduction required to make my $10 million investment pay off? Oh, if you reduce this likelihood by just 1%, it's there. Or no, you have to reduce by 90% to pay off. So it's probably not likely paying off if you invest. So the probabilistic analysis will give you an edge on many of these things and manage your plant better. I see this in mining, I see this in petrochemical plants, refining plants, production of oil and gas too. Any kind of production curve is usually, imagined like this, a smooth curve with some phases around it, but in reality it is very shaky. And sometimes you have evolving plants, right? You are making an investment to increase your capacity. How fast do you get there? So from let's say 1,000 barrels a day to 1,500 barrels a day, how fast do you get there? What are the bumps you face along the way? So all of that can be modeled in the probabilistic sense.
Excellent. Thanks, Rafael. I'm going to have to stop you there. That was a really great session. It's covered so much, everything from technical and theoretical to your tactical and real world. It was really good. For me, that the thing you do best is explaining the results and how they actually impact businesses. It was spot on. Gives us ideas of how we can do things and bring things from our own models to the stakeholders and but more importantly, I guess, actually use them ourselves. So
yeah,
we're gonna take a 5-minute break now. So let's make it easy. Let's take a 7-minute break so people come back refreshed for the second case study. So we'll come back at 4:55 UK time. So 7 minutes from now, we will start with Francois Joubert's case study. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.